All right, this is attempt 3 on this video. It's sponsored by Alienware. I have done this multiple times now. I did one actually right after Riot's scheduling change news came out at the end of last year, right before they went on break. It looked really good. I didn't like the way it came out. Drew did a good job making it look pretty, but didn't come out well. Then I did this again, and I just didn't think it was good. So we're just going to speak from the heart and see how well we can cover the issue. The issue, of course, being Riot's scheduling change for the LCS, their communication around it, and then kind of tangentially, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dash stuff too, because that fits into it. If you didn't see, Dash announced today that he's not going to be hosting the LCS next year, well, this season, and a lot of people have been talking about that. So let's dive in. One, the prevailing sentiment from everybody seems to be that Riot has decided that Valorant is the most important thing now. LCS must suffer and die a lonely, sad death because it's not relevant. I don't blame anybody for thinking this. If you go into Reddit threads, if you go on Twitter, there's a ton of people that are just like, hey, you know, if you look at people leaving the broadcast, that probably is something to do with budget cuts. People have been pointing at the FTX report about how much money Riot was making from the FTX sponsorship. Now that's gone, so people think like, oh, that's probably more budget cuts. And then you just see the fact that like Valorant is getting the weekend and LCS is moving to the weekdays, and people think like, okay, they've decided that Valorant is going to be it for North America. LCS is no longer worth trying to keep prop afloat, so they're just going to let it die alone. It is really important that you understand that that is not the case. That is the whole purpose. The whole purpose of this video kind of hinges on you agreeing with me that that is not the case. So let me try to convince you. Number one, I talk to people at Riot on the esports side and outside of the esports side constantly, at high levels of the company, at low levels of the company, and no one there has ever told me that Riot is trying to shutter the LCS. Quite the contrary. Everybody really thinks that there's a pretty big alarm bell going on inside Riot about the LCS. I think, quite frankly, it took too long for the alarm bell to come through. I think they were kind of able to hand wave a lot during the COVID era and like, oh, you know, like COVID makes it tough. There's a viewership spike associated with that for a little bit. And so people were kind of writing stuff off. But no, people really are, one, worried about the LCS, and two, they think it's very important that it succeeds. I know some of you are probably going to say, well, like, oh, well, Travis, people are just telling you that, or you don't believe me when I say this. But like, I talk to a lot of people. They are frustrated with things. They could tell me they're willing to shit talk. Let's put it that way. And none of them ever tell me like Riot's given up on the LCS. Everybody internally is under the impression that it is a big, important goal for the company to turn around LCS, at least for the esports side of the company. Maybe you think I'm just getting scammed by all these people. So let's talk about some other things here then. Well, Riot has a pretty big ego as a company. I think a lot of you can probably agree with that. There's a lot of folks there that think that the company is incredibly superior to other companies, that it is just a company capable of doing incredible, amazing things. And in some ways, you know, they have done some pretty impressive stuff that people don't want to give them the credit for. But all that has given them a huge ego. It would be incredibly damaging to that ego if their number one esport, because again, LoL esports is still their biggest esport around the world. It is their premier sport. Obviously, they want to grow Val, but like right now, it's still League of Legends. It's their biggest game. It would be very damaging for their ego if the sport that takes place across the street from their headquarters dies in the home region of the company. Like, that is not something that they are down for. They would not allow for that to happen without putting up a fight. They wouldn't choose to just be like, ah, fuck it, let's move on from League of Legends. Again, think about it in a global sense. Like, this game is huge outside of North America. It's not like there's any particular reason to think that League of Legends should just be thrown to the side for Riot. Another reason, there's a financial reason here too. Yes, obviously they lost money. Well, they lost revenue with the FTX deal dying, and I've heard that there's a couple other sponsors that didn't renew either. But the global part of League of Legends esports makes a considerable amount of money from North American sponsors. So think about Worlds, think about MSI. You see Verizon on that broadcast. You see MasterCard on that broadcast. They just announced like a huge extension to the MasterCard deal even at Worlds. It is not going to be good for keeping these sponsors paying a ton of money into the global sport if the sport dies in their region, right? Like if there's no League of Legends esports of significance in North America, Verizon is probably not going to, one, obviously sponsor what's left of that in the region, but two, pony up the money to sponsor the global part of it too. I also think it's really important to note that like as they're trying to build Val, do you think that it's a good look if the other esport that's been around for a long time dies in North America, right? Like they want to have a strong story about how they've done all these incredible things in League of Legends esports, and if that league dies, it's going to make people far more hesitant to invest into or spend money around Val. Like it's just not a thing that would be true. Finally, again, going back to the whole thing around Val versus League and like, are they doing this to bolster Val? Like I'm so frustrated because Riot's done such a poor job of communicating around this. But the truth is, LCS would probably be moving to the weekdays even if Valorant didn't even exist. It was reported in the Blix article by Alejandra, who was the first person to break the news about all this stuff, that's not related to Val. That the scheduling change for Thursdays and Fridays, not related to Val. I've heard this stuff long before the Val stuff. I don't like it's impossible to change this now because the narrative has just caught on and because Riot's done such a piss poor job of like fighting against it, which drives me crazy because like they should know. They should totally know that this is going to be a thing. In fact, they do know because again, they had months of preparation to prepare these two stupid articles that came out last minute at the end of the year, less than 48 hours before they went on break. And because this news got leaked in like October, they knew this was a huge issue, and they just did such a poor job of properly approaching it. I don't know how else to say it, but Riot has a lot of incentives to keep LCS alive. They don't have any incentives for this thing to die. So like as much, and again, I don't blame you because they've done not a great job of dissuading people from this, but please trust me when I say that like they want LCS to thrive. They want it to grow. They want to restore it to the prestige that it used to have. And the rest of this video, if you don't believe me right now, you should not watch the rest of this video because it's pointless because you have to have that premise going into the conversation I want to have. So now that we've had that conversation and you've decided to stick around, let's talk about the two big things here. One, the communication around all this stuff, which I've already complained a little bit about, but we're going to dive in a little bit more on. And two, my biggest concern, which is actually the schedule for the LCS. Not the days, but the time. So let's talk about the comms. As I mentioned, the decision to put this out in 2 articles right before the start of the break is terrible. I'm actually really happy that my other videos did not pop off or that I didn't post the one last year, because now I get to renew this conversation. So let's do me a favor, everybody. If you're watching this video, just pretend that Riot put out all the information now, because I think it is annoying to me, the idea that like they would rush this out last minute and then let it die over the holidays. So let's all just agree to pretend that like they just announced this now and, react accordingly, have the conversation accordingly. Don't accept this as a thing that's old news now. So again, it is so aggravating to me that they had so much time to prepare for this conversation and how crucial this conversation is, because so many of the fans and the people in the ecosystem are really burned out on the negativity around the LCS, right? They need reasons to be hopeful for 2023. Honestly, the teams did a pretty good job of assembling rosters that make people pretty excited. Like coming out of offseason, I feel like people were pretty optimistic about a new level of parity within the LCS, with teams putting out together rosters that should be pretty entertaining. And then you turn to Riot and you say, okay, well, what do you got for us to get us excited for 2023? And they release these like 2 articles that are just filled with stuff that does not feel particularly exciting. The award for worst part of that goes to the stupid Snapple bottle fact that they decided to include in their reasoning behind making these changes. Picking what to watch can be a chore. Research shows that the average person makes 35,000 decisions a day, and deciding what match to watch shouldn't be one of them. By scheduling our games right, you have to only choose to watch, not what to watch, simplifying the process. It doesn't simplify the process if people have to choose between if they can watch this match at 12 o'clock on the West Coast or go to a meeting that they have scheduled with their manager. Like, of all the things to include, and the funny thing about that fact is it just tells me, like, when I read it, that is not a fact that they included haphazardly. It's definitely a fact that after Riot had already decided to make the decision to move this thing to 12 o'clock, somebody included it in a PowerPoint presentation internally. It's like, oh, here's another reason. It's like, people make too many decisions. Well, thanks, Riot. Now the decision needs to be, can they even continue to care about the LCS because you've changed it to such a shitty time? Like, it's just such an example, right? Like, by no means is that the most damaging thing in these articles, but it is the stupidest thing. Like, you come out, you have to convince people that the unpopular decision that you have made and that there's been discussion about for months is a good thing. And what you decide to do is include a fucking random ass fact like that. It's just so bad. Now, I know that some of the issue is that Jackie Felling, the commissioner, is away for health issues. She obviously would have been a great person to be able to communicate about this stuff, but like, do an AMA, do other stuff, do a video with other people. Don't wait until the last minute to publish this stuff when you know it's going to come, so that like somebody in the last minute has like a health emergency and you can't do it. It's just like, it just gets so frustrated because one of the biggest issues with the LCS right now is the reputation around the league and the perception of how Riot cares about it. And they just can't seem to get out of their own way around this stuff. And it's not that hard. It's just not that hard. And you see all of this come out in the reception to all of it. Ironically, the leaked news, I think, was actually more well-received than when they officially put out the news. Because when it first got leaked, there was a conversation around, like, okay, is it bad that the LCS is moving to weekdays? And there's actually a lot of nuance in the response from people. There were a lot of folks who said, oh yeah, you know, I have aged or my schedule has changed or whatever, and having this on weekdays is better than the weekends for me. Now, obviously, a lot of you also thought the weekends were better, but at least there was like what felt like from the outside, like a 50-50 response to stuff. And it made me feel like, okay, well, maybe the schedule can work just fine. But then they come out and they announce that it's going to be at noon. And especially in the second article, they have really poor, they did a really poor job of just addressing that, which was not well received. Brian Kibler, who I know has watched the league forever, he tweeted about this and he said like that he feels like LCS is actually dead and that's one of the worst broadcast decisions ever made. And this is a guy who defended Magic the Gathering's 30th anniversary edition. Just kidding, Brian. I love you, but but like it's just universally been considered terrible by brands that I've talked to, like sponsors, by broadcast folks, like people internally at Riot. Like nobody is excited about this 12 o'clock thing, unless you live in Europe, and I just like it's such an obvious example of how Riot's comm strategy failed to convince anybody, folks on the team side, whatever, whoever outside of Riot and many people inside Riot, they just don't buy this 12 o'clock thing. And so it's just poor. And before we go on to the second half of this, which is like the 12 o'clock thing, which I think is the big issue, this stuff kind of extends over to the Dash stuff, right? So Dash announced, as I record this today, that he wasn't going to be hosting the broadcast. Riot's completely silent about it. I guess they retweeted it. And I don't really understand why you would just, like, when there's so much negativity out there about the league and recent decisions, and there's a lot of people thinking actively that you are killing the league, why would you just let that hang? When I know that there's actually a pretty big effort internally to change the broadcast away from feeling super sportsy, right? So they're changing the broadcast. The fact that it's not going to feel super sportsy, they don't necessarily need like the host that they've had in the past, like the hosting role. I'm not talking about Dash. I think Dash is great. I think he's super fucking talented and deserves all the acclaim that he's gotten over the years. But like, okay, Dash announces this, come out with a post or some sort of video talking about LCS broadcast in 2023, and you say, hey, over the years, when LCS first started, we really focused on trying to put the sports in esports, and we felt like emulating traditional sports broadcast style was really important in defining and getting credit for what esports can be, and we think it was really successful. But as time has gone on, the expectations from our audience has changed, and we no longer feel like we need to prove ourselves by emulating sports as a product. And so to that end, we're going to be making changes in the style of the broadcast. We think these are going to be really exciting. Unfortunately, this also means that certain roles will be changing, and we're really excited to work with Dash in a completely different capacity, and we hope that you all will receive this well when we are sort of experimenting and learning and trying different things. Wouldn't that have been received better by everybody rather than sort of this thing where you're completely silent and it just kind of perpetuates the idea that like the broadcast is cutting and like it's being put out to pasture? And again, just so that nobody misconstrues this, I think Dash is great. I think it seems like they could have done a much better job of working with him to make sure he had clear understanding of what his role will be going into the next year and the ways in which that they could work with him. Again, he's like super talented. He comes from acting. Like, I think you can do a lot of really cool stuff with that. But again, they could have just communicated around this better. Now let's get back to the scheduling stuff. Obviously, the comms around the scheduling changes has failed. I think part of that is the comm side. I think also part of it is because it's just a bad idea. You are going to be putting LCS at the same time as like Jerry Springer reruns and the Ellen Show, like it's daytime talk show stuff. Like it's not primetime TV time for any North Americans, right? Like people are at fucking work. I've heard, really quickly, I just want to address this. I've heard a lot of people say like, oh, well, you know, work has changed a lot and a lot of people are at home and they're watching the LCS broadcast on the second screen while they're working. That is a very privileged perspective. I talk to a lot of people who come up to me at events and they tell me like that my podcast helps get them through their long haul truck drive or working at a warehouse or whatever. Like a small percentage relative to the rest of the U.S. population actually works from home, and that a lot of people are returning to the office. Like Riot is actually making a lot of people return to the office. You can't always work at an office job even where you can just have a video game tournament happening on a second monitor if you have access to a second monitor. Like it's just very out of touch, I think, with what the average person does for their job, to just assume that everybody has some cush job where they have two monitors set up at home and they can just chill and have the game going on the other. Again, by the way, you have fucking meetings you have to do. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But again, going back to this stuff, a lot of the people that I've talked to on the team side or elsewhere are telling me that they're like, oh yeah, we expect this experiment to fail, and then we just hope that Riot's willing to change the schedule if it doesn't work well, and we'll change it by 2 to 3 hours. And for me, one of my big concerns is that a lot of you, and I see this talked about online a lot of people have been feeling pretty fatigued with the LCS, very gloomy about the future of the LCS. And when you tell people that this product is not for them, by placing it at a time that is incredibly inaccessible for them, which is, again, like lunchtime on the West Coast, 3 o'clock on the East Coast. And then, by the way, if you missed this, you can go look at the schedule. All the best matches are stuck at that time. It's not even a situation where you're building to those matches. You have them right at the beginning. So if you live on the West Coast and you are busy at 12 or 1 o'clock on a Thursday or Friday, you don't get to watch the best LCS matches unless you're willing to watch a replay later on. And I don't think very many people are. So when you tell these people that the LCS is no longer for them because you've placed it at a time inaccessible for them, they're probably just going to fucking walk away. They're going to go into 2023 expecting that they're not going to watch the LCS. And if you change it 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, they've already moved on. You can't. How do you get them back? You have to then figure out a way to recapture those people, to tell them, oh, by the way, we've changed it to more accommodate you. They've already missed the first several weeks of the league. Like, are they really going to come back? That is my big concern here. And when I talk, by the way, about them saying the LCS is not for you, and when I talk about 2 to 3 hours of difference, because that's what I think it is, by the way, if you start the broadcast at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock on the West Coast, you end up with way better times for those last couple of matches on the East Coast and on the West Coast. A 2 to 3 hour start time difference could mean people actually still buying in to this product from North America. And I say North America because what's obviously clear from the articles that they've posted, and when you look at like a time zone map, is that what they are trying to do is grow the LCS audience by looking at the Western audience rather than the North American audience, which is crazy to me. This is a North American product. The LCS exists as a product for North American fans, or at least it should, because it's a North American league. The LEC is there for European fans, and I like European fans. They kind of shit talk me during Worlds a lot, but I don't dislike them. But I think that when you are targeting Western fans in Europe rather than Western fans in North America for your North American league, you're doing something wrong. Because do you think that the person in Germany or the person in the UK or France or wherever is going to be buying tickets to go to the LCS Spring Finals or to watch a match in the LCS studio? Or are they going to sign up for Verizon 5G service after watching a post-game interview? This league needs North American viewers, right? You already put almost all of your global events at times that are inaccessible to the North American audience, and now you're going to do the same thing with the North American League. Do you have so little faith in this audience that you're unwilling to actually put the games at a time in which they can watch them? It's crazy. So this leads me to the end of this video, where I just want to say, behind the scenes, I've talked to a lot of people. They're pretty concerned about this. A lot of people are really concerned about this in the industry. And again, a lot of them think, oh, it's okay. Hopefully when it fails, Riot will just move it. I don't know how much damage will be done in those first several pivotal weeks that are the kickoff to the season that won't be able to be recovered. And I know you guys have slightly hemmed and hawed on social media, or you've been silent publicly, but then been very vocal privately. Please, I ask of you, go talk to your Riot contacts. I think the Thursday, Friday stuff is actually not that big of a deal. I'm down for that experiment. I think a lot of people are too. It is worth trying. 12 o'clock is not a time that North American viewers can watch. 3 o'clock is also not a time that most North American viewers can watch. It is not a good idea to be doing this. It is going to cause a lot of damage to a league that is very fragile right now, and that needs to be able to be watched by people in its home region. So please go talk to folks at Riot if you have any kind of sway with them. If you are a player, talk to the Players Association, get them on board with this. If you are a sponsor, if you are a team person, please go talk to Riot about this. I know I mentioned this elsewhere, but like the teams were talked to about the time stuff, but they did not get a chance to like vote on it or anything like that. They didn't have a say. So, yeah, I think this is really rough, but big issues around comms, big issue around the timing, makes me really worried, makes me really frustrated. Riot, please get your fucking show together, because I love this product and I just want it to succeed. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you did enjoy it, please subscribe. It's actually really helpful. I don't know how many people are going to be unsubscribing as they plan on not watching the league this year. Also, please go check out Alienware, because they just announced a whole bunch of stuff at CES that's going to be coming out in this first quarter, including new notebooks that look really, really awesome. And then also they have a 500 hertz refresh rate monitor that just got announced. That's crazy. Maybe you are planning on just playing a bunch of Valorant, switching over to Valorant. It's a great monitor. They've just got some cool stuff that's coming out. So please, you can do a search and see all the coverage and cool things that have been announced by them over at CES this first week of January. So thanks so much for watching. And we will see you next time, hopefully